It isn't raining
Yeah,
yet.
yeah. So how much of the year do you all live there?
Oh, we try to live here for a week or so out of every month, but it tends to be a different
Oh,
week depending. More in the
yeah,
hot weather.
yeah. And the rest of the time in Arizona?
Yeah, Scottsdale. Yeah,
Yeah.
where I think
Oh,
it's
that's great.
106 today.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as I told you, I grew up in Amarillo, so
Yeah,
we
yeah,
went to Santa Fe all the time.
yeah, very nice.
Yeah. Um, well, thanks again for making some time for us,
My pleasure. Yeah, glad we finally
and
got it to
congrats.
work.
Yeah, and congrats on the book too.
Oh, thanks very much. Yeah, I'm very
Yeah,
pleased at how that's doing.
yeah. So we'll just talk for about 15 minutes, and then we'll edit this down to the best bits,
You like?
um, and then we'll run it next week.
Okay, sounds
So,
great.
so tell me, I guess my first question, just sort of out of curiosity, is what is it like emotionally returning to the same characters over time for you?
Ah, well, it's extremely interesting, and I was actually discussing this with one of the actors, excuse me, from the TV show, and I told him I think one of the reasons why it takes so long between books, aside from the size, the complexity, the engineering, and being on the road to promote them so dang much, is that I kind of have to live into the same age that they are, or close to
Mhm.
the age of the main characters, in order to kind of have the right perspective on life, because you do change your perspective as you grow older. And had I written Outlander at this age, it would have been a different book than it is. But it was Sam Heughan that I was talking to, the young actor who plays Jamie Fraser, and I told him it's really charming to experience Jamie as a young man again.
Oh, that's great. But in addition to sort of getting to experience these different ages, you 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 get to experience a lot of different historical ages.
Oh yeah.
Um, so because your imagination is so sort of boundless and you go across all these different times, I mean, it felt to me like that's a lot of fun for you.
Oh,
Is
it
that
is.
accurate to say?
Yeah, no, absolutely. People not infrequently say, well, if you could time travel, what period would you go to? I said, I can't time travel. I do it all the time. you know, Good part is that I can come back safely.
Yeah. And so thinking back to when you started out, I mean, was it difficult for you to get published?
No, actually, it wasn't. It was embarrassingly easy. Uh, I wrote Outlander, as you probably know, for practice in order to learn how to write a book. But assorted things happened. I got an agent before I had finished writing the book, and when I did finish, I sent it to him, and I said, "Well, as I've been finishing up, I get the feeling that there's more to this story, but I thought I should stop while I could still lift it because it was rather large." And I said, "But if anyone's interested, you can tell them that there's more." And so he sent it out to 5 editors who he thought might like it. And within 4 days, three of them had called back with offers to buy it. So he negotiated amongst them, emerged with a three-book contract, and being I was a novelist.
Oh, that's amazing.
Well,
And
it
can I
was.
just say, like, after a number of years of being a journalist about books, I think you're the first person to ever say that it was easy.
Well, selling the book was easy.
Right. The
yeah.
writing was still hard. That's the important part, right?
Well, I don't know that I'd ever describe writing as being either hard or easy. It's just a really intense, focused kind of effort. Uh, and some days you don't feel like doing it at all, but you do it anyway. On those days, it's kind of work, at least when you start. But then things start happening. It's a lot of fun, or things don't start happening, and you're pushing rocks uphill with your nose. But still, something is happening in front of you, and you get this feeling of virtuous effort at the very least. So there's constant positive feedback involved.
Hmm. But speaking of your kind of process and writing every day, it was fascinating to me that on your website you talk about this latest book where you spent 36 hours straight finishing it. You got the
That's not
copy
unusual.
edits back right away,
Yeah.
and then it went
No,
to
well, it's a Chinese
press.
fire
Like,
drill.
yeah, I mean,
yeah,
is
it
that what
it
it's like for you?
happens that way. Yeah, yeah. With any of the major novels, actually with the Lord John novels as well, it often does happen that way, because I see shapes when I write, and the shape fills itself in as I'm working. And once I've seen the overall shape for the book, the writing gets a good deal easier and somewhat faster. But the thing is, that is a shape. I can change it to a slight extent, but not a whole lot. And so as we got closer and closer to my April 15th deadline, I took a look at it because my editor had actually suggested that I should just stop writing, at some point. I said, no, we're not going to do that. But that did make me look at it. And I said, well, there are 3 subplots that don't have to be wrapped up in this book. I could, because I know where they're going, but it would take me another month to do that. And yeah, that's not happening. So those 3 plots I kind of folded back on themselves. I shelf hung them. None of them ends in a cliffhanger, but they end in a more or less satisfactory place where there's more that's going to happen, but you're not dying to find out right this minute. And then I took the main storylines to a successful conclusion, and that preserved the overall shape of the book for me. But it is always a push, because the book has its own life. Once I've seen the final shape and we get into what I call the final frenzy, the last 2 or 3 months of writing a book, I know everything. I don't have to stop and look anything up. I don't have to think about anything. It's just there, and it's this live thing that I'm connected to. And that's like holding onto live power cables. It's just coming through me, and it's coming right back out. And so the only limiting factor is my own physiology. How long can I sit still at the keyboard without falling over? That is limiting. So as we get closer and closer, it stops being limiting. I just work through. And so every single one of the last 4 or 5 books has been this sort of last-minute fire drill kind of thing, which is very hard on the publishers and the poor production people and all that. So I give them full credit for always being there to spring to the charge. Yeah. But I have manuscripts from a plane at 30,000 feet and every place else you can think of.
Right. Well, one of the things that it seems like critics tend to say about your books is that they cross genres.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, and I wondered if that's something that a critic should point out. But I wondered if you, as a writer, if you're conscious of that as you're writing it, or is it just that's where the narrative goes and you take it there?
Yeah, no, when I wrote Outlander, as I say, I wrote it for practice. I wasn't expecting to show it to anyone, let alone try to get it published, so the question of genre was just irrelevant. So I used any literary device that I happened to like. Now, I've been reading, for more than 50 years. I like everything. So I just used any device that, seemed good. Consequently, let's see, the only thing I have not seen my books sold as is Westerns and poetry, I think. But I have seen them sold as literature, history. No, I should say historical fiction, regular fiction, historical nonfiction. This is true. I saw them on the history shelf in Foyle's bookstore in London. And when I pointed it out to the clerk, he said, well, Miss Kitty Foyle, who was about 92 at the time, but still kicking, said, Miss Kitty decides where everything goes in the store. She's read your books, and apparently she believes in time travel. So there they stay. Science fiction, fantasy, let's see, mystery, romance, military history. This is true. Several of my books are sold by the Military History Book Club. Gay and lesbian fiction, and horror. This is also true. I won a Quill Award in 2006 in the category Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror, for which I beat out both George R.R. Martin and Stephen King.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, you name
yeah, that's kind of impressive.
Yeah, it is sheer disregard for any sort of publishing convention is all it is.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, since you started with Outlander, I mean, a really interesting thing has happened in publishing in that, the genre categories used to be much more distinct. There was literary fiction, and then there was science fiction and horror.
And never the train should.
Right. And
take total credit for disrupting that at Amazon.com.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but it's really nice because it's a richer world, I think, when those lines are blurred.
No, it's a lot, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So another thing that I found impressive is your communication with your fans. It seems very affectionate and pretty constant. Is that something that you knew you needed to work on, or did somebody say, be sure you communicate with your fans, or how did that evolve for you?
Oh, none of that. It was very organic. Back in the 1980s, I had sort of slid sideways from, I was a biologist in my previous incarnation. I sort of slid sideways in my job and become an expert in scientific computation. It's real easy to be an expert if there's only 6 people in the world who do what you do, which was my position at the time. But that led to my writing freelance for the computer press when I needed extra money. You know, I would do software reviews for Byte and InfoWorld and PC Magazine, specializing in scientific and technical software. And so one day in the mid-'80s, Byte sent me a new package to review, and with it a trial membership to CompuServe. I think you probably aren't old enough to remember when we had 3 information services, and that was all: Delphi, Genie, and CompuServe. And anyway, they said, well, this software vendor has an online support forum, which is just the coolest, sexiest thing ever. And they want you to mention it, and it's on CompuServe, so, you know, sign up and look for it. So I did, and after writing my article, I had 4 hours of free connect time left. Well, this was in the day when they charged you $30 an hour to be connected to the internet. And so I said, well, I'm not wasting $120. What's in here? And so, I mean, this was before the World Wide Web, before America Online, before anything, essentially. This was the very beginnings of the public internet. And so anyway, what else was in there that I stumbled into was a bunch of people called the Literary Forum. And this was not a writers group. It was a group of people who liked books. Most of the people there were well, they were all readers, but some of them were also writers, both professional and aspiring. You know, they would talk about what they were doing. The people who were reading books would ask them questions. Everybody would talk about the books they were reading. And it was like a 24-hour literary cocktail party, which for someone with 2 full-time jobs and 3 small children was the ideal social life. So, you know, I signed up on my own, got automated software so I didn't go broke, and, you know, started hanging around there. So I was not going to tell anyone online what I was doing when I began writing a book a year or so later, because I'd seen a lot of people come through the forum who would talk about a project they had in mind, and they'd talk, and they'd never write a word. And eventually you could see the professional writers all kind of rolling their eyes when this happened. I said, well, I'm not going to tell anybody. I said, I'm going to write the book, and I'll see if I want to talk about it. So I just kept quiet. But one night, about 6 months into it, I was having an online argument one night, you know, just posting messages back and forth with a man about what it feels like to be pregnant. And he said, oh, I know what that's like. My wife's had 3 children. And I laughed. I said, yeah, Buster, I've had 3 children. He said, well, can you tell me what it's like? I said, I can, but it's kind of complex. I don't think I can fit it in a 30-line message slot, which was all we had. I said, I tell you what, though, I have this little piece I wrote a few months ago in which a young woman explains to her brother what it's like to be pregnant. I said, I'll put it in the library for you, and you can read it. So my husband says I am congenitally unable to lose an argument, and he is right. So anyway, I put it up, and everyone who'd been following the argument went and read this piece, and they came back and said, well, this is great. What is it? And I said, I don't know. And they said, well, where's the beginning? And I said, I haven't written that yet. And they said, we'll put up some more of it. So I don't write with an outline, and I don't write in a straight line. I don't even have chapters until the last thing before I send a manuscript to my editor. And so I was... my stupid phone is ringing. Let me turn it off.
That's fine.
There you go. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, I would have scenes is what I work in. Start a scene and I'll work in it and go back and forth hundreds of times before I'm done. But when I am done, it's done. You know, I don't do rough drafts and polish. I just fiddle constantly as I go. And when I'm done with a scene, it's as good as it's going to get. So whenever I would have a scene that didn't take a lot of background explanation, because I didn't have any, I would put this up for my friends on the Lit Forum. And this would be like, 5 to 10 pages maybe, that kind of stand alone without a lot of explanation. And people kept reading these and talking to their friends, and they say, oh, Diana has a new chunk. Have you read it? And they'd all read it. They'd come back and ask me questions, and one thing after another. And after a few more chunks, people began saying, well, this is great. You should try and publish it. I said, well, I don't even know what kind of book it is, but with the time travel and the Loch Ness Monster and that sort of thing. But yeah, eventually I'm going to write a book that I'd like to try to publish. So, for the sake of argument, what should I do? Well, I did at this point know, on a friendly basis, a number of professional writers. All of them said the same thing. They said, you should get an agent. They said, a literary agent can do 2 things for you. He or she can match your manuscript with an editor and get you read much more quickly than if you're sending it into a slush pile. If the book does sell, then the agent can negotiate a much better contract for you than you could do by yourself. All of which turned out to be true. I said, great, how would I find an agent? Well, they were all very generous about sharing their own stories and advice. And I began in a lackadaisical way, sort of gathering information on agents and researching the whole thing. Well, I began to zero in on this one gentleman named Harry Knowlton, who I thought might be a good match for me. He represented several of the writers on the Lit Forum whom I liked, and they all thought he walked on water. He was also a very eminent agent. He lived in New York. He had lunch with editors. That's what I wanted. I'd also learned that he wasn't afraid of very long books or of unorthodox books, both of which it had struck me I had. So he seemed like a good match, but I didn't know how to approach him. He didn't take unsolicited queries. So I thought, well, you're not finished writing the book, go on asking questions. So I did. And one day I was talking to a man named John Stith, that's S-T-I-T-H, who writes science fiction mysteries, Redshift Rendezvous, you may be familiar with, and so forth. But anyway, I asked John, I said, I'm asking everyone about agents. John, do you have one? He says, well, yeah, by coincidence, it's the same as so-and-so's. His name is Perry Milton. And he said, I know you're almost ready to look for an agent yourself. Would you like me to recommend you to Perry? And I said, well, yes, John, that would be very nice. And so I was afraid John would leave CompuServe or be run over by a bus and before I finished. And so I said, yes, go ahead, ask him. And so he sent Perry a note, just a regular typed note. Perry, God rest his soul, was a much older gentleman who never touched a computer in his life. So every communication I had from him was typed on very elegant gray linen paper with a manual typewriter, not even IBM. So anyway, he just sent Perry a note saying, I know this woman from this group I hang around with. People think she's hilarious. I think she's worth looking at. And I followed that with my own brief letter, and I said, dear Mr. Norton, I've been writing and selling nonfiction by myself for several years, but now that I'm writing a novel, I understand I need good literary representation. You've been recommended to me by John and Judy and all these other people whose opinions I respect. That I have this very long historical novel. I don't want to waste your time. Would you be willing to read excerpts from it? I didn't tell him I wasn't through writing it. Excerpts were all I had. But he very kindly called and said, yes, he would read my excerpts. And so I hastily wrote a 26-page single-spaced synopsis, sent it with my excerpts, and he took me on the basis of an unfinished first novel, which is not common now, and it wasn't common then, but it was very lucky.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so anyway, that's where I started with the online stuff, and that's a circuitous way of answering your questions, which is the fans have always been with me, you might say. Yeah. I'm still on CompuServe. We're now called the Books and Writers Community, but it's the same place, essentially. Many of the same people are still there 30 years later. But, as the social media world began to expand, I had a website in 1994. I don't know if I was the very first author to have one, but I was certainly among the first. And, I didn't bother with MySpace, but, when Facebook and Twitter began to be, commonly accepted, I sort of stuck my feelers out, and it was easy, I was accustomed to do this already. So I just sort of gathered them in. I mean, there are techniques for handling social media, so it doesn't eat your life.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So one more question. How involved are you with the TV show?
Oh, well, let's see. I am what they call a consultant by contract. They show me scripts. They show me footage. They're very courteous about asking my opinion on various things. They invited me and my husband to come out to the set and spend 10 days with them in February. They gave me a cameo role in one of the episodes. I got to be a TV actor for 2 whole days and see what their life is really like. As I said to Sam Ewan afterward, I said, well, now I know what it's like. I said, it's indentured servitude is what it is. And he laughed and said, yes, that's exactly what it is. But anyway, fascinating. So anyway, the answer is they've involved me to an amazing extent. I didn't expect anything like this. So we should remember that while they do ask my opinion, they're under no legal compulsion to take it. I am purely a consultant by courtesy, and they appreciate the courtesy very much.
Oh, that's great. Well, thanks, Diana.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Yeah.
Glad it finally worked.
Yeah. No, thanks for your patience, and congrats again. And we will run this next week. So.
Okay. Yeah. If you like, send me a link, and I'll put it up on Facebook, etc. Yeah. My
we'd love
email.
That would be great.
Yeah. My email is diana.gabaldon@gmail.com. Really easy.
Okay. Great. Okay. Well, we will let you know once it's up, and congrats again.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Okay, you have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.